COVID was a spark plug for amplification of awareness. Yeah, the indoor environment does affect our health and well-being. It really did start to showcase the long-lasting and durable trend towards the infusion of wellness into just about everything we touch. Why not the largest asset class? Why not real estate? We're putting wellness in all these consumer goods. It's not water, it's vitamin water. You can go on and on. Dozens of examples of how wellness made its way into consumption for all the right reasons. And we just said, okay, well, how about the largest asset class in the world? That's the largest consumption there is. Let's infuse it into that.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on today's show we have Peter Scialla to talk about the healthy building movement that he and his brother have been pioneering with the company Delos and its subsidiary, the International Well Building Institute. The word regeneration within the real estate design and development industries gets tossed around to mean different things to different people. I happen to enjoy this complexity though, and the diversity of thought has kept me coming back time and again to drink from the regenerative well. I'll admit though, it is not easy for our society to grasp onto regeneration because it combines a psycho-spiritual way of being that is guided by the quality of our thinking. At the end of the day, a working definition that I particularly appreciate is that regeneration is about the health and well-being of life on this planet and our ability to make decisions that will enable life to co-evolve and thrive. While the mainstream narrative of real estate is focused on financial wealth generation, the work of this show is to help stretch our perspective of seeing real estate, our homes and habitats of all forms, as catalysts for healing and conduits to foster genuine wealth where health is wealth. I wanted to invite Peter Scialla onto this show because it's been interesting to witness people en masse begin to think more critically about how our spaces impact our health and well-being. Now, we can say that this happened naturally as a result of the global community going through a pandemic, but I think it's also fueled by people becoming more acutely aware of the impacts of things like air, water, and food quality on our own health, on the health of our communities, and on the health of the environment. Originally founded by his brother Paul, Peter is the CEO and president of the wellness real estate focused company Delos. Delos is an interesting company because their work is science-backed in an effort to contribute towards healthier indoor environments. The company also helped to spur the International Well Building Institute, which is the host of the Well Building Certification and the Well Accredited Professional Designation. As you'll hear, Peter and Paul had interesting backgrounds and skill sets that led them from Wall Street into wellness, and we get into how Peter sees the wellness movement going forward. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. I'm really interested to have our guest on today, Peter Scialla of Delos. And this is really an ongoing curiosity of mine, how we're starting to see wellness creep into the real estate space. And certainly Delos is one of those names that if you don't know it, you should know it because they're doing a lot there. So Peter, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time to come on.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be with you today.
Peter, we were talking before we hit record. You don't see too many people with a Wall Street background getting into really wellness space in general. And then you made the point that you don't see it twice.
Yeah, yeah.
And that you got a twin brother. And I'd love to just pick it up from there, like maybe y'all's background and origin story into the longer arc of your career.
Sure, we'll do that. Yeah, that's a good point you make. When Delos operates at the sort of intersection of real estate and health and wellness, right? The convergence of the building sciences, really, I don't know, good examples would be architects and engineers, right? With the health scientists, so medical doctors and health experts. Neither Paul nor I has that background or have either one of those backgrounds. And interestingly enough, as we were talking before we got started here, Delos was founded by my brother and myself, but really it was Paul's kernel of an idea. Both of us actually worked on Wall Street for 18 years before starting Delos and jumping ship to work on Delos full time back in 2012 at this point. So it's been 10 years. It's been a long road, a good one. Prior to that, I was at Swiss Bank and then Morgan Stanley, and then the last 10 years of my career at Goldman Sachs, really centering all of the activity around that time on equity derivatives trading. So, trading operation at Goldman is a big one. Things were going really well. My brother, he went to Goldman Sachs before I did, different division. He was in bond trading and fixed income trading. And lo and behold, Pete and Paul were back at it together at the same company. And that was really like the last 8 to 10 years together at Goldman. He was a partner as well. So we're kind of running different divisions and doing a lot of different things. And Paul started to get really interested in LEED certification and the green building movement. As Paul started to see all of this news and press in and around the 2009, 2010, 2011, really after Katrina, that was the explosion of the green building movement and really the heightened awareness for the public that global warming was a real thing and had real consequences, right? So LEED certification, green building. And the question that was asked at the time was, well, it's wonderful that there's so much progress being made as it relates to measuring the built environment in regards to its effect on environmental health, the carbon footprint, and I guess that followed with the intuition of why stop at thinking about how buildings affect only the health of the environment, right? Why not also consider the impact that buildings are having on our human health, all right? So the occupants of these spaces. And that was a bold proposition. At that point, the green building industry was launched. It was real, it was big, it was growing. And, really what the implications of this thought was that there could be a whole separate movement in parallel to the green building movement called the well building movement that really just kind of completed the sustainability narrative, right? One half of the sustainability narrative, it was our view, was focused on the effect of indoor spaces on the environment or buildings on the environment. And the second half of the sustainability narrative really should be centered on the effect that buildings have on people, on the people inside, on the people that occupy these spaces. We spend over 90% of our time indoors. Clearly, the science is telling us that these indoor environments are having a profound impact on how we sleep, our digestive health, our cardiovascular health, our immune health. And of course, it's easy to get your arms around some of those principles when you think about now in a post-COVID world, heightened awareness around air quality and air filtration, examples over the last decade or two of water contamination and the problems that can lead to. But it got very interesting when we started to examine light's effect on the body and on sleeping patterns and susceptibility to long-term disease. And we said, look, this is deserving of its own parallel track, independent of the green building movement. And so we set out to launch the International Well Building Institute, a wholly owned subsidiary of Delos, and really just get doctors and architects to start having professional dialogue for the first time. That was an eye-opening moment, right? When you realize that these two professions certainly had a lot of conversation at cocktail parties, but it was really in a social setting as opposed to a professional collaboration to support the convergence of these two disciplines. And it's been a fun go at it. Definitely some groundbreaking stuff, but not what we thought we'd be doing. The day both of us made partner at Goldman, I didn't think that, 3 or 4 short years later, to be giving that up and really giving a lot up in that regard as far as sort of runway and security and doing something in the startup space. And it's paid off, and it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, it's interesting because you could have gone in a lot of different directions. It could have been like, well, food that's coming in the front door is also affecting human health. And then agriculture is like a huge real estate class. But to go really focus on this area that, we tangentially, I think we might have been in some people's consciousness of the engineers and the architects and the doctors. But how do you then take this idea where you have no subject area expertise?
Yeah.
You've got a derivative and a training background.
Right.
You really start to coalesce, not just the Well Institute, but then you're bringing in Delos. Like, how do you take those skills of Wall Street to then be applicable to really fan the flames of what could be a parallel movement?
Yeah, no, interesting. It's the right question. And at the time, we acknowledged, that again, neither Paul nor I was a doctor or an architect or had much experience at all in real estate. And so this was about applying good, sound skill sets and business practices from a Wall Street career, and over time, really developing, I guess, the knowledge surrounding finding the right people, hiring the right people, relying on the right people, and expanding that ecosystem to institutions such as the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, some doctors from Columbia University. It was after the moment that we saw all the science that surrounded us with real names, real people that believed, yeah, this is a great mission. Certainly we can do some passive interventions in the indoor environment. And boy, if we could use the world's largest asset class, real estate, where we're spending over 90% of our time as an actual medical device, if you will, right, to passively improve health outcomes for occupants of those spaces, it was easy for us to gain enthusiasm from great thought leaders and institutions, whether that was scientific, academic, or professional. And we set out to create a standard for building and design, and with these principles in mind, and said to ourselves, with great advice from some of the folks even that started the LEED building movement, with their observations saying, you really want this to be an industry movement and an industry document, an industry standard. So we put it out for peer review, countless numbers of doctors and architects and engineers and sustainability consultants. Got the rigor of the science, from the institutions that I just described. And over time, this really became something that was an industry movement. And I think that's helped with our adoption, because it wasn't, just a couple guys saying, this is what we think you should do to your lighting and to your air quality and your water and acoustics and things like that, but rather a body of work that was assembled over 4 years, putting a lot of capital into the research to substantiate it. Ultimately, when it launched in 2015, we had the confidence that there would be adoption because we were guided by the right people, but really relying on expertise of others and kind of putting those pieces together. So I'd say the one trait, the one skill from a business background was really hiring practices and personnel selection. Paul and I said we need to surround ourselves with people that are a lot smarter than us to do this, right? And that's a trick in hiring that doesn't necessarily get over the line sometimes. In our case, we found some wonderful people, some wonderful leaders, including Rick Fedrizzi himself. He founded the Green Building Movement with LEED certification and was the founding chairman of the U.S. Green Building Council, a CEO of that organization for 15 years. That to me and Paul was kind of like saying, okay, we've got the science, we've got certainly, some good confirmation that there's demand out there and we're filling a market void and this is a great idea. But, at that point in time, we kind of took a pause and said, good, now, where's Michael Jordan? Where's the Michael Jordan of this space, right? That we can go and attract to our organization. And at that point, it was Rick Fedrizzi. That was an extraordinary move. And being able to attract talent like that was, again, something I think we were relying on some prior skills to do, but it was absolutely essential that we were looking for people that already had success to run the same playbook. And then, of course, improve that playbook, having learned from experience, which really gave the International Well Building Institute a lot of bounce in credibility. Launching the standard was tremendous for Delos as an organization because it was the first thing we did. I think we've gotten viewed as sort of not only pioneer and thought leader, but an organization that is in its bones all about credibility and science and separating fact from fiction and where's the real truth in these answers. And if you're relying on the science, you're going to win. And that's what we did. And we took our time and we spent a lot of money building what we thought to be a real good fort or a moat around this body of work, principally getting buy-in from organizations and institutions that felt like they had some co-authorship of the process. Because when you're going to put a standard on an industry and say, okay, here's some new rules and here's a set of fees if you want to go through the program, you've got to do that delicately. You've got to get all stakeholders at the table, make them feel like they've had a voice and that they're aligned with this mission and it's the right thing to do. because otherwise, there's just so many barriers to adoption. And so it was a long process, but I think that investment and that overinvestment in getting the buy-in from industry professionals was a big one. And to this day, we have over 20,000 individuals like architects and engineers, sustainability consultants, HR professionals enrolled in something we call the Well AP program, which is the accreditation of professionals, AP, that are versed in the well building standard. And they're promoting the movement now in over 110 countries. And that's a whole army that essentially is acting like a sales force and has helped create a fire, which was certainly there before COVID. And then COVID was a spark plug for amplification of awareness. Yeah, the indoor environment does affect our health and well-being. And whether it was COVID that ignited that or something else that would have, it really did start to showcase the long-lasting and durable trend towards the infusion of wellness into just about everything we touch. Why not the largest asset class? Why not real estate? We're putting wellness in all these consumer goods. It's not water, it's vitamin water. You can go on and on. Dozens of examples of how wellness made its way into consumption for all the right reasons. And we just said, okay, well, how about the largest asset class in the world? That's the largest consumption there is. Let's infuse it into that. And that's worked out well as far as the model of the business.
What do you see as those themes that really have picked up speed, or maybe they've started hot and remained hot, of people's awareness around, oh, I can do this in my office building or within my house? Like, where do you really see these things start to flourish?
Yeah, look, I mean, over the last 24 months, it's been all about air quality. And I think that's because you've had a virus that initially everybody ran for the wipes and the cleaning and the sanitization. And it was thought that it was all about surface contamination. Very quickly, I think that the science told us that this is airborne and that it's aerosolized particles being spread in the air. And so the focus is on air quality, and it has been for a couple of years. But interestingly enough, when you look at the pillars of the WELL standard, or the different categories and ways you can improve a home setting, an office setting, anything, an airport, a library, a school, we're touching all typologies. Air quality is easy to get your arms around, okay? And I think now the invisible is starting to become visible, whether that's with sensors that display data or people's realization that if I stood across from you and I slid you a glass of water and it was dirty, well, you wouldn't drink it, okay? In the air, you can't see that. And I think what's happened now is people are starting to realize that although you can't see it, there are things that can harm you in the air. And so purification of that air is key and paramount, not only to health and wellness, but in certain environments to, short-term health risks and acute safety, right? But beyond air quality, something to really open our eyes. I mean, because water filtration and water purification, again, it's been around for a couple of decades. There's no secret in the fact that you need to purify water before you drink it, and you need to clean air before you breathe it. But when we got to the category of light, it got very interesting, and it was very new. New for science is like a decade old. Okay, if you're talking about science that's a decade old, you are really talking about something brand spanking new. The human body is the human body. Things don't necessarily change, but what doctors uncovered, call it 15 years ago, was the circadian optic nerve in our eyes, okay? And that is something that, for the first time, made the scientific community realize that our eyes are not just vehicles for seeing, okay? They're also instruments to tell our body what time of day it is. Because our body, depending on a natural 24-hour sleep-wake cycle, is doing a number of different things. Increasing cortisol production for energy, increasing melatonin in the body. These are hormones, right? Increasing melatonin when it's time to prepare for sleep, and countless other things that trigger digestion and reproduction and just about everything you could imagine inside the body. And that circadian cycle is so important because, unfortunately, what we've done as a society, of course, fortunately for so many ways, including the progress that's come out of it, but we built boxes around ourselves, right? And then we introduced artificial light. And here we are all at 11 p.m., just before we're going to sleep, and we're staring at our iPhones and our laptops and our TVs. And for the most part, companies are starting to address this, right? You've probably seen night settings on your phone and things like that. But that light, whether it's coming from the light bulbs or anything artificial, if it's not the sun, that's coming into your eyes at 11 o'clock at night, as an example. And your body's all of a sudden thinking, whoa, okay, it must be 11 a.m. Let me get my cortisol up. I don't need that melatonin. I'm not sleeping right now. It's about energy, and then it's about digestion, and then it's about sleep, right? That's a trick to your body, and it's very harmful. In fact, the American Medical Association has gone on record. The wrong kind of light is actually carcinogenic. I mean, this could lead to susceptibility of chronic disease and certainly sleep quality in the very near term. I mean, the light that's going into your eyes right now will affect how you sleep at night tonight. So the proper setting and doing things that address that and kind of smooth out that circadian cycle is what got us excited and really, made us both realize, okay, with conviction, this is an independent track here. This is not something that just is folded into the green building movement, but rather substantiated by all of this evidence that we're really talking about distinct things, and they can complement each other, and you can do both. So it's not an either or, but it put the focus on people and people health instead of environmental health. And I think that was a big deal when we realized that it's not just the things that are obvious, like purify the air and clean the water. There's so many other things to that. The effect that sound has on your stress levels, and creating ambient sound levels that are more conducive to not raising your stress markers, because we know how harmful stress can be to the body. All of these things, as they started to come to light, gave us more conviction that we were on the right track. And so we continued.
Yeah, as you talk about this, what I find fascinating is that you're putting out the well AP, you're putting out a certification, you're putting out products to help with this on the Delos side. Yeah. But a lot of these things are cultural. Like, we're getting promoted all kinds of stuff under the sustainability banner that's actually putting in all kinds of Wi-Fi rays throughout our house. And the average homeowner or home occupant has no idea. They're kind of oblivious. So it's like, do you want to bake this approach towards the built environment, this wellness approach, so that it is just standard? Or do you feel like you have to educate so that people are at least somewhat aware that their indoor quality, their building materials and all of that is actually creating an impact on how they're living?
It's a great question. There's a need to educate. There's no doubt. It's all we did for the first 5 years, educate why the science is important, why these things are real, and that they have impact, and that improving them can not only increase your health and well-being, but also your productivity. It can also reduce susceptibility to long-term chronic disease. I mean, the implications for healthcare costs. By doing this in a preventative fashion, as opposed to responsive medication and pills and surgeries and things like that, if you can actually do this along the way in a preventative and passive way, especially because we're always inside. There's certain climates where the number fluctuates and it's lower, but about 90% of the time we're indoors, and that's something that does require us to educate, and has in the past. It's gotten a heck of a lot easier as the momentum in the movement gained traction, as our adoption rates, started to go, okay, 1 billion square feet, then 2 billion square feet. Now we're over 4 billion square feet in 125 countries. I mean, you're talking about like 40,000 different building locations all over the world right now that believe in this. That it gets easier. And frankly, on the adoption side for corporates, the advantages of doing things like this and reporting them in the ESG world, okay, environmental, social, and governance for corporations, is driving most of the decisions of those large organizations. So we've got this real good tailwind on it's the right thing to do. And ESG all day long on the institutional side. For consumers, it's still about education. Air quality, I think that's been check the box, right? People get it and they believe that air purification is valuable. I'm not sure if you ask 10 people, okay, go measure the ambient sound levels in your room. And I don't know whether your air conditioning making noise or if there's a rattle going on, but how many out of those 10 people would know that if the decibel levels are higher, just sort of pure ambient sound, that's hurting your body? I don't think they're there yet. There's a lot of education still left to go. And that applies to all of these different categories. Light is very exciting. It's a cool thing to talk about. It's an that makes sense. And now the world and industries are starting to catch up to that. In fact, when you go to lighting shows now, these annual, product lighting shows, 10 years ago was all about, LED and cost savings and lowering a carbon footprint. Now, 95% of the dialogue is about how light is actually a tool for health and well-being. And it could be harmful to health and well-being if you're using it the wrong way. So it's great to see that the knowledge around this is catching up, but you're correct in saying it does still require an education. With residential in particular, there's some great, observations, I think, in the industry right now that there's a need for differentiation. We're seeing a lot of demand from home builders, from people that are also, buying up inventory to rent it. I mean, they're looking for ways to get attached to the wellness narrative and to do that with credibility. Because, of course, whenever a new theme comes around, it gets real crowded real fast. You wake up, everybody's a wellness company overnight. Claims from manufacturers need to be checked. They need to be validated. They need to be tested to separate fact from fiction. That's what our organization is about. And so we've kind of seen a lot of periods of time when a category gets hot. And most recently, it's just been an absolute explosion, the drive towards health and well-being. And thankfully, we've been at this for quite some time. So we have a wealth of knowledge to share. And that's what we continue to try to do.
Yeah, it's wild to watch wellness really explode as a category, because you do start to see derivatives off of that. If there's a sauna in the home, now all of a sudden it's a wellness home.
Yeah, that's right.
But what you're talking about is being like so research backed and having people like the Mayo Clinic come on board. Like, that's a very fundamentally different approach. So how do you maintain integrity as a market leader whenever you've got a bunch of newcomers that are just like, they're trying to put that stamp of wellness on a product just because they see this as a trend?
Yeah, we continue to reiterate the need to validate claims. You talk about making public health claims here. It's not something that can be taken lightly. And not only do you need to test and check whether the product works for the reason it was intended to be used, but also, are there other harmful byproducts that are getting produced as a result? Does an air purifier, in the process of cleaning the air, does it also perhaps generate ozone by throwing charged particles out into the room? And you do that next to a window and the sunlight coming in. I mean, there could be ozone issues there, right? You might be creating more problems than just solving one. And so our organization is built on that credibility and that validation. We're not here to discredit anybody's work. We're not here to throw daggers at any products, but we will obviously provide our view, and our view is going to be guided in science, and facts are facts, and I think that it's all about testing and it's all about examining. And as the wellness space gets more crowded, including the stuff in the ESG bucket that I just talked about, there's so much well washing going on right now. I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And okay, you got to measure these things. You got to understand how material they are. You have to understand truly if there is a benefit or if there's an effect. And then, of course, lastly, you've got to determine whether there's an ROI in spending the money to do it. That's just business. From a consumer, they have to make their own purchasing decisions, and there's a wealth of information out there, as far as required testing, not just for safety, but also for health. And we think that we're playing a key role in driving the world in that direction. Prove it with science, right? And then make the claims with confidence.
Before we get back into this episode, I want to give a shout out to our friends at Green Canopy Node. They are doing some incredible things that I wanted to share. You may have heard their co-CEO, Aaron Fairchild, on their Regenerative Real Estate podcast, or maybe you were captivated by Aaron's talk at the Regenerative Real Estate Conference this past summer in Maine that we hosted. You see, Green Canopy started off by wanting to change the market within Seattle by doing green flips so that developers would need to chase the market and appraisers could have good comps to value sustainable futures. However, they weren't able to create a scalable process with renovations, so they moved into new development of fossil fuel-free homes as a model that better fit for what they wanted to do. This led them into the world of raising large investment funds in order to provide enough capital for them to acquire and develop properties. Over the years, they got really good at raising and managing funds and began to provide these kinds of development services for other developers. They didn't stop there, however. They then partnered with Node, a manufacturing construction company, in order to create a scalable model that other builders and developers could leverage. This dove them into the world of cross-laminated timber as a way that they could create a sustainable supply chain to advance sustainable forest stewardship. Over the years, they've worked with a lot of capital, but it always came from accredited investors, institutions, and family offices. Now, for the first time, they are looking to align their capital raise with the democratized approach and have launched their first crowdfunding campaign. For as little as $500, you can invest into their latest fund. I'm excited to see this as part of their latest offering, and you can learn more by visiting the investment website at www.startengine.com/offering/green canopy node.
Peter, we have a lot of developers and builders that tune into the show, and they do both commercial and residential. And you'd said this briefly, but they are looking to differentiate. They are in a marketplace, and they're trying to take some kind of a competitive edge. I'm curious, if you are in those shoes and you're a development professional, what are some of the best ways in which you would take the best of the wellness industry and infuse it into the built environment from that perspective?
Yeah, from that perspective, looking for those marketable differentiators that have valid claims behind them that can give you an edge. There's a lot of trends in residential right now. One in particular that we're seeing is this, unfortunately, because rates have gone up so quickly, there are a lot of folks that have just gotten priced out of the ability to buy a house, not necessarily because of the price of the house, although that's not a great, factor for them right now, but equally the cost of borrowing. We saw a lot of capital get into this. Okay, I'm going to buy a bunch of inventory and rent it out, because rentals are seemingly going to catch a lot of demand right now. As folks can't buy homes, then they're forced to rent. And so the need for differentiation is coming hot and heavy from groups like that and and market sectors like that, but equally on just, home builders delivering newly detached single family homes, looking for differentiating factors. And we can address that with things like certification. We were asked as an organization at IWBI to provide a certification for homes, because we certify everything else. They said, well, how about single family homes? And so that effort was launched last year. We invited the industry to coalesce with us on that, and we're shaping that standard for launch next year, which is exciting. So you've got the certification bucket, but practically speaking, in the home, there's some power statements that can be made by checking an air, a water, and a light box, and it does not have to be very expensive. We know that there's obviously, considerations on input costs when you're thinking about re-engineering a home and maybe ripping out the HVAC and putting something new in. I mean, that's intrusive, right? And that does increase input costs. But wall-mounted air purifiers placed selectively throughout the house have actually been proven, including a study we did at the Well Living Lab. That's a laboratory that, as I mentioned, was founded as collaboration between Delos and Mayo Clinic. And we tested the effect of portable air purification units, basically because they're so much less expensive than having to do something in the HVAC and change filtration. And they use so much less energy as well. Here's the good news. You increase the number of filtration points in the house. You bring those filtration units closer to where people are actually convening. And that has been remarkably successful in proving out that the data suggests, you have a multi-factor reduction in risk of, let's just say, either COVID transmission or other things. Big deal, especially when you're talking about better science, more effective, lower cost on investment, and certainly not intrusive from a labor perspective. So that's the kind of double win we're looking for, those situations where you've got a better scientific outcome, so a better health outcome, and you also got a cheaper, less intrusive process. So it does seem to add up to a lot of demand. So that's a powerful one. So, and I think in the air quality bucket, you can get your arms around a number of different ways to solution this stuff. There are rights and there are wrongs. I'm not saying that these units are the best for all outcomes, but it was a way to kind of showcase for a specific purpose, this will be the best solution, and let's check to make sure the science works. And it does. Beyond that, there are, of course, things in the other buckets like water filtration and the claims that can be made, especially if there's concerns about areas of the country that may say, well, I could be very similar to Flint, Michigan X episode. I want to make sure that I'm spending the extra money to purify my water. But then there's things that don't cost any money. They're just better decisions. Like, for instance, countertops or tiles. A lot of times with the tiles that have a lot of grout and a lot of cracks and a lot of seams, that's where bacteria can collect. And it's hard to keep sanitized. So seamless countertops, although sometimes people just may do it because cosmetically it's better. Sometimes people will deliver product like that because Not only does it look better, but maybe the costs are cheaper. But the bottom line is the scientific claims that can be made with seamless countertops. I mean, that's just a more health conscious choice. You don't have those little crevices and those little grouts for things that can infect you to actually accumulate and gather, right? And so from a hygiene perspective, that's an easy, very low-hanging fruit, but something that's very marketable. Night lighting. I mean, there's so many cost-effective ways to just put night lights on top of an outlet. You don't even have to do any more wiring. Okay. There are outlets that have night lights built into it with the proper circadian color temperature so that when you get up at night, you can see your way to the bathroom, but you're not turning on the lights. Because remember, 2 o'clock in the morning, you take a trip to the bathroom. If you turn on the lights to get there and get back, that's your body saying, whoa, okay, hold on. It's noon. Okay, let me jack up my cortisol. Let me suppress this melatonin. It's not time to go back to sleep. And yes, you'll fall asleep after that, but you're blasting your body with the wrong kind of input at that point in time. And it's not going to be the high quality rest that you deserve and that you need to heal and to grow and to obviously keep your immune system at its high. That's an easy, very marketable thing to do, right? Night lighting, motion sensor, these are not expensive now. These are very inexpensive ways of tackling a category that people can learn from and all of a sudden start to get pretty excited about because they're doing smart things. Dozens of examples, but I figured I'd give you a few that are quite marketable.
Yeah, those are great examples. I really love that. You get a lot of things going on right now, and I'm curious if you're to fast forward 5 years from now, what do you really want to be celebrating with Delos?
Well, look, Delos as an organization has shown some success, both on the solutions and technology side, but certainly as standard bearer as well. And what we've seen even within the well-building movement is this is now moving beyond real estate, right? This is something that if you look at parts of the standard are focused on health equity, health safety, all right? And a lot of these things are related to policies and protocols that buildings, that organizations that are operating inside these buildings and occupying these spaces, it's how they run their business. So thankfully for us, that's opened up a much broader audience where initially it was like, okay, just new construction. Okay, we in 2016 opened up a number of programs that made this extremely applicable to facilities that are already built. So existing homes or existing offices and existing structures. That's, every year, maybe 1 or 2% of new real estate gets built, but 98 to 99% of it is there already. So we wanted to go after that part of the marketplace to touch more people, to positively influence more lives, not just the shiny new building projects. So over time, it moved from just new buildings to now all buildings. And we expanded typologies to be not just commercial office, but schools, libraries, airports, public facilities, restaurants, anything with 4 walls and a roof, anything where you're spending time indoors, and now increasingly into even places like transportation. Because again, you've got confined spaces where people are dwelling for periods of time. But beyond real estate, this is also a way of thinking, right? This is about arming people with the right information to make good decisions. And inspiring behavior change is a hard thing to do. Right. But if you can do things that are passive and acting on the body, on an understanding that it doesn't necessarily require people to change their habits, that's where we think we have got a lot of success. Because just being in these buildings, these homes, or these spaces, if they are increased as it relates to their effect and their positive influence on health and wellness instead of negative influence on health and wellness, then you don't need to inspire behavior change. And that's all a plus. And the hardest thing to do is get people to change their habits. You could show them, you could lead them the way, but it's hard to get that to be really sticky. And that's why we took the approach, well, let's take the environment that surrounds us, which is a passive, intervention, as opposed to requiring people to do things to benefit from it. Just by being in the space, that is good for you. And that was the goal we were trying to achieve.
Yeah. What fascinates me is the market potential of this as well. Just like you created an organization. I don't see too many people that like lead. It wasn't couched under a larger organization like Delos, if I'm wrong.
That's correct. Yeah.
You didn't see that with the Living Building Challenge either. There are other certifications out there. And so it's an interesting kind of 2-step combo that you've taken to really keep progressing forward. Yeah, go ahead.
On that point, I mean, it's a great topic that you're broaching there. There's always been a need, and we've been very focused on this, to separate, parts of Delos as an entire organization that are focused on solutions and interventions and practical things like products, right? Versus the part of the organization that is writing the standards, because there can never be a conflict of interest. There can never be influence from one side to another. And so the International Well-Building Institute is a separate governance, right? Separate headquarters, separate board of directors. It's entirely separate operation or company, its own independent company within the Delos umbrella. So we have made it very clear that there is no influence from one side to the other. And that's important, right? It's important for integrity and important so that, nobody has a misconception about the fact that if I need to, or if I want to get well certified, that I'm actually required to engage with Delos on the product side too. No, that's not the standard. The standard is achieve the following outcomes. We're going to come and measure those outcomes. And how you get there is your choice, right? There's no required specific or explicit products that can be used. And so there's a distinction that has allowed us to operate independently in that regard with integrity, right? But at the same time, have access to the larger organization here at Delos, which, is funded with private capital at this point, but it's been that capital that has allowed us to drive innovation and drive these things forward. And I think that's a very different approach than, some of the original or older thinking that, in order to do something, you got to be a nonprofit. I think we benefit from the fact that we've had access to capital in order to innovate and innovate faster and scale quickly around the globe. The faster we scale, the more people get positively impacted, and that's just fact, and so I think it has expedited our progress.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of those factors that just really add up, because if you can have ambassadors that have their well AP, that they can then begin integrating this into the practice. We have a company, Latitude, where we're on the sales transaction, and so oftentimes we see people just miss an opportunity to talk about these benefits or technology that's within their homes or their buildings. And so every time we can really advance that to start to shift the culture, I think it gets better and better. And I wanted to underscore for people that there is a lot of market opportunity to attune themselves as a real estate professional to advancing more health and wellness, more sustainability, more regeneration within the space overall. That it can, there is a triple bottom line approach to all of this.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. That's a great observation.
Well, Peter, this has been a great interview. I'm really just inspired by what you are doing, because I think, from a business case towards actually making progress within the built environment. Do you see the green building movement really meshing in it? Do you see this as being a simpatico thing that is getting adopted, or will it ever be parallel? Is it forever going to be parallel movements?
No, there's ways to synergize and create harmony between the two movements. As a matter of fact, we're walking that walk just at Green Build, which is the annual conference for the U.S. Green Building Council and LEED and the whole industry to come together on green building. We did, make an announcement a couple of weeks ago that we're working together with the U.S. Green Building Council to provide for dual certification pathways, right? Just create those synergies. And it's never been perceived as an either or at all. But we have a great relationship with the organization and the movement at large. Green building and well building are complements to each other. By doing both, you can really and truly understand that you've tackled the entire sustainability narrative. And so it's been important that this isn't a competitive process. There are benefits that we can offer organizations on the green building side and vice versa. And it's really a similar community of well APs that have gotten accreditations by LEED or other organizations. So they speak that language. Very important that we're deeply rooted in that part of the marketplace. And it's where we started. It's where we're going to continue to make progress. And hot off the press, just some great news as it relates to IWBI and USGBC, getting even more aligned to figure out the ways that benefits in one bucket can automatically, mean benefits in the other. And how can we go to the end user and make that more harmonious? So 100% in line with what they're doing.
No, that's exciting. Well, Peter, thank you for the work that you're doing. I find this just really intriguing. I hope this really gets out to the right people to continuously push forward in the built environment, because we have a lot of way to go. As much progress has been made, there's a lot more to go. And I look forward to really staying tuned into to what you're doing with Delos and what's going on with the International Well Institute. And if people are curious, go check out the Well AP, the Advanced Professional certification, because I know that there's been a lot of great reception around that. But thank you for taking the time, Peter. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. Great questions. It was good to chat with you. Looking forward to next time.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the show today. If you want to follow our work at Latitude, you can follow us on Instagram at latitude.regenerative.re, and mine is at I am Neil Collins. We inherently believe in the potential that comes from connecting value-aligned and purpose-driven people together in community. That's why I encourage you to join our mighty network and introduce yourself to the other people working across the globe to advance a more regenerative, resilient, and beautiful world. Here, we want to know what you're working on and what inspires you. Through this platform, you can attend live events, take courses provided by our podcast guests, and create connection with other people and businesses that share your same passion. To join, find the link in our show notes or visit our website at chooselatitude.com. If you'd like to support the show, please share it with your friends and be sure to follow us on your podcast app so that you always have the latest episode downloaded. Another way to support our regenerative field building is to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Positive ratings help attract amazing guests, and they can be the deciding factor for someone else to tune in and listen. And who knows? Maybe this is the kind of motivation that it takes for them to finally decide to align their profession with their sustainable and regenerative values and become a positive force for good within their own community. This show was produced by myself and edited by Anthony Wallace and offered as a part of our work with Latitude Regenerative Real Estate.